Okay, so welcome to the next part of the breaking down and close reading the poem "We Are Surprised" by Ada Limon in Bright Dead Things. Where in this one, I'm going to do two different things with you. The first is I'm going to show you my document, and I'm going to share that with you as it's going, so I can explain what I've done so far. And then I'm going to walk you through the next step, where I'm going to be looking at the imagery of the poem to see how I can come up with some kind of argument about it, or at least start to develop more of a cohesive sense of what the poem is trying to accomplish. So I'm going to enact that as I'm doing in that one. I may try to write some of the sentences while you're watching the video. So in some ways, this is not going to be very exciting, but I'm hoping that what it is it's showing, kind of pulling back the curtain, showing that there's just a process going from looking at a poem to thinking about what it does to then trying to communicate that in writing. A lot of my students over the years, they tell me, they can think it out, they can understand it in their own minds, but when it comes to putting it down on the page, things get really discombobulated. Things get mixed up a little bit. Most of that's just from practice. You just have to write more. It's a skill set, right? But none of us have time. I understand that. So, but hopefully watching what I'm trying to do will be helpful. Not to say that I'm a great writer. That's not at all what I mean. Just that I understand that this is the template that I'm interested in and the approach. So hopefully you can learn from that. So I'll stop giving qualifiers, and I'm going to show you now the document that I'm working on that is basically this essay, this rough draft of the essay. And there's a few things I want to point out to you before I actually go into the content. So this may actually take a little bit longer than normal with one of these videos, but I'll try to keep it, again, relatively short and informative. As always, if you have comments about anything in terms of any of the content that you're receiving, please let me know through email, and I'll be happy to do that. I'm also starting to put in these little Easter eggs toward the end of these. Maybe you can watch the whole video and get some extra points. Extra points if you pay attention. That's education. Okay, so what do we got here? We got the student name, so that's the first heading. Notice I'm in Times New Roman. I'm at 12-point font. I've already set my whole paragraph, my whole paper, excuse me, to double, what am I trying to say? Wow, double spaced. And I do that from the very first, so there's no mistake with that as I go forward. I've gone ahead and I put in the date the paper is due in on. That's just a good habit to get into. It's when you don't have this, when you put the wrong date here, does it cost you points? Not exactly, but what it does show me is that you didn't look at it very closely, right? Now, that's not always true. Everybody has mistakes inside of their papers. This might be like a one-off. If this says like 3rd of June, that's just like you missed this one thing. Nobody's perfect. I get that. But if it becomes sort of a problem within the paper that there's these little revision editing mistakes, what I'm really trying to do this semester, especially in 102 with this very short word count, is to get you to be precise about what you turn in a document that shows that you paid attention to the specifics, you're respecting the course, you're respecting the content that we're trying to cover. And in doing so, you allow this conversation to occur where I can just think about ideas and we can have communication because you've shown that you get that this is part of the system that we've all agreed to participate in this education. My section followed by the section letter for us is A, and then my word count, which of course I don't know yet, but I'm going to want those on your papers. This is all that really needs to show up inside of the heading. You don't need to put my name, though you're welcome to, if that's something you're comfortable or just used to doing. I have my title. I'm definitely going to come back and revisit this at some point, but I like to remember that there's always a title inside of papers. So I just really basic close reading Ada Limon's in the rough draft, right? So in a normal paper, obviously, I'm not going to put this stuff in there. This is just for me to kind of get a sense of almost bullet pointing them, and I can come revisit these as we need to. In fact, I'm going to revisit these, and I'm going to have a video on how to do revisions later on in the week. But this just gives me a sense of I'm feeling comfortable about what I want to try and do. So I start with an introduction of my paper. What am I trying to accomplish? So usually in an introduction, I want to cover the what, the how, and the why, which is also what I want to cover inside of a thesis statement, as well as what I want to understand a poem to have done. So basically, I want to make sure that inside of an introduction, when I'm looking at it, I want to make sure I have at least the title of the collection. It wouldn't hurt any to include my author's name. Let's be very upfront inside of our academic writing. What I mean by that is to say that you want to let the reader know that you understand all of these things, right? That's why it's really important that if Ada Limon identifies as she, that we always make sure we say she and not he. We need to do that kind of basic approach. And of course, we can always be safe with gender and use the word they, which I think is the right pronoun now in the terms of thinking about how a person would like to be identified. So when we can use that every time, but with little things like making sure we understand those elements inside of a paper that again shows that you spent some time with it. You took a little bit more than just the very basic approach. So Bright Dead Things here, I have the title. Notice the title of the book is in italics, whereas the title of the individual poem will be in quotation marks. Make sure you know your formatting. It's really easy to grade that. So this is my intro. The themes of loss, death, and grief, the circular reality of those experiences. So this isn't super clear right now, but what I'm trying to say is that these all kind of coexist with one another in this space, and they develop an already lonely and embattled voice. So I'm trying to bring in the first section, about her loneliness, and then now we're going to see how she deals with grief in this particular moment with the speaker dealing with grief and loss and then death. And I'm basically not really making a great argument. I'm just saying that it develops a lonely voice. So I'm not really saying what it develops into. And so I might even actually put that in there. I want to later have a much clearer sense of what that is, something to prove. I don't have it now because I don't know it yet, but I'm trying to get to that place. And then I move right into the poem I'm going to look at. So there's no surprises there, basically. Let's see what it did. We are surprised. Then I'm going to mention what I'm going to talk about. Line breaks, okay? And I'm calling this surrealistic imagery. So I'm trying to be specific. I'm using my adjective to describe imagery. Imagery is pretty broad. So I'm going to use surrealism and what I mean by that, and I'll explain that right as the paper goes forward. And I'm saying that this allows for a coping strategy to appear, and it's how imagination is a refuge from emotional and psychiatric pain. The poem acts as a guide on how to approach grief with poetry, lyric, music, and love. So this is my argument now. My argument as of right now is that this is a kind of guide. So we can read this poem and we can understand that there's another way to cope with all of this stuff, and it's actually through poetry, lyric, and music, and love. So is that super perfect? No, but it gives me a thesis to work in. It gives me a direction, right? I'm calling it a guide. I'm calling it a coping strategy here. These aren't particularly at odds with one another, but I can probably in revision clarify these two. In fact, I'll probably leave myself a little note here just to say, like, let's look back at these and combine them. Okay, that's what that color coding will do for me. So clear enough. Perfect? No, but it definitely makes sense to some degree. So I'm comfortable with it as is. I move into my summary. I think these are nice to have inside of papers, even if I don't actually include this in my paper directly as a whole body paragraph. I might take parts of this and incorporate it inside of my some of my analysis. And the reason for that is that I want to show the reader that I understand the poem, right? I understand, I should say, but I know the content of the poem. That we're not questioning whether or not I know the plot, whether I know the characters and the setting. What we're talking about is the more nuanced approach, because I don't need to tell you the plot. You can find the plot. That's something that we all need to be doing when we're looking at it, is kind of the surface material. And what I'm trying to do now is to go a little bit deeper. But it's nice to know, it's nice to know what that first level is. And in this one, I'm actually making the argument that defies a typical summary. The narrative movement combined with its surreal images, such as when the characters take the moon into the middle of their brains. So notice what I've done there. I'm in my summary, I've gone ahead and I've given something from the poem as an explanation of what I mean. So that now I'm not planning on analyzing this. In later paragraphs I will, but I'm also obviously talking about summary. So this doesn't need to be analyzed right now. But what I'm saying basically is like this kind of refuses an easy encapsulation. In other words, that isn't like a super clear, I mean, it's a clear image. They take the moon into their brains, but also it's not like the same thing as saying we had a ham sandwich, right? That's a different kind of action. So the general movements of the poem suggest a transition from a time of being hollowed out, right? And into a realization that such processes that they may not make literal sense allows for the light that the characters finally came. That's a kind of a messy sentence. I need to look at that, but I was trying to get my ideas out pretty fast. And basically I'm saying the poem still operates as a transition from one experience to another, from being hollowed out to filled with light. And this is the kind of two places I'm trying to deal with. And then as such, the poem enacts an imaginative coping mechanism. If you notice here, what I'm doing is I'm trying to pull back my thesis from up here. So I'm using some of the same language, right? Imaginative, coping, the grief here. The straight path doesn't always follow the most logical steps. Okay, so again, I'm trying to repeat my thesis to make sure that we're where we need to be. And then I'm gonna move into the poem breakdown. I'm gonna be looking at imagery and the surreality of that imagery, and does it need research support? Is my question to myself. And my answer is, yes, I think it does. So how does imagery interact with the grief process? process. So I'm at about 225 words, 226 words. Some of these will be shorter. I'll probably cut this down closer to like 190 or something, just trying to get where I want to be, which is good because now still the majority of my work is going to be about analysis. I'm going to look at imagery and line break, though I'm starting with imagery. And before I end this particular video, I'd like to try and share with you sure I get to the right space, the content on these two things. So I'm going to pause this just to make sure that I am showing you the right desktop, and then I'll be back momentarily. I'm not actually going to do that because I don't want to screw this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video here. The next one will be about imagery and sort of turning those into sentences, and then line break after that. And that'll be what we'd work with on Ada Limon. So let me know if these are working for you, if you need any more content, or if this is clarifying, or really, if you have some comments and criticisms that I could do better on, don't hesitate to email me and I'll be in contact. Okay, we'll see you soon.